we know that the left can go too far, and we know that the right can go too far. I mean, I would say that's the abject lesson of the 20th century. Both can go too far. And we kind of know when the right goes too far. We probably think the right goes too far, if you had to boil it down to one thing, when people start making claims of racial or ethnic superiority. That seems to be the marker. But we don't know when the left goes too far. And the left, to be frank about it, isn't very careful about differentiating itself into those who are pursuing a reasonable progressive agenda and those who have seriously gone too far.
Hello, welcome. Today I will be punching upward in a very big way. Not just punching upward because some of the YouTube channels I've got my information from have 6 million subscribers. Not just punching upward because I'm in opposition to the dominant social standards. Not just punching upwards because this involves Google and YouTube, but punching upwards ultimately because this is not a video about crazy SJWs going into meltdown. This is the real reason why deplatforming has just exploded, taking out people on the right, left, right and centre, so to speak. I mean, when it comes to social media, you can understand Nazis and white nationalists getting deplatformed, centrist right-wingers getting pulled down for ever so slight reasons, while the left claims to champion the rights of minorities. They can end up pulling down Milo, not just Jewish, but gay and Jewish. They can end up pulling down people who aren't really on the right-left spectrum. Alex Jones is a kind of conspiracy theorist, entertainer sort of type, crazy product and crazy claims, but you couldn't call it dangerous. And ultimately Jordan Peterson, who is self-professed to be against an ideologically driven outlook because it puts you in the sort of strange self-contradictory cul-de-sacs like I've just mentioned, like banning a gay Jewish man and things like this. So what is the reason? Why is this happening, and how does it serve the left's rationale, if there is any rationale? Well, there is. Let's go through it.
I fell down the alt-right rabbit hole.
This guy could be the poster boy for fears of the left and far left. He is one slow-talking, boring-ass motherfucker, though, so I'm gonna chop bits out and speed things up a little bit, but be assured I haven't messed with the ethos of this. The very reason for showing this guy on the channel where I got it from was to explain how you can become an anti-SJW.
I come from a poor rural background, and I thought that I was going to get myself out of this situation, get an engineering degree, go, get into environmentalism, maybe solar panels or something, and I was going to change the world and accomplish all my dreams and get away from all these, it's funny looking back, conservative type of a society that I felt was too regimented and wanted to control me. But when I went to college, that's not what happened. I got depressed, and there weren't a lot of people like me there, and I got in with the wrong crowds, and I got depressed, I got lost, I was looking for the wrong kinds of validation, and I ended up flunking out. I became very depressed upon returning home. My friends had all left. I was alone. I didn't have a good relationship with my family. I would stay in my room and I would just surf the web all day. And I went back to YouTube. This little video, this YouTuber popped up in my sidebar. It was Stefan Molyneux. Stefan resonated with me because Stefan had shared the same experiences that I'd shared. Stefan, he had a traumatic childhood. He had issues with his mother. He had issues with the rest of his family. He had issues with the society around him. He was angry with the society around him that never stepped in and did anything to help him. And these were all things that I felt. It rang so true to me. And then he talked, he started talking about how he was able to get out of it. He blamed a lot of his situation on liberalism. He was charming and intelligent, and he had a different message with it, with content that had a different format that I was used to. And I wanted so hard to believe that this person who was like me was able to fix themselves. In my mind, I set him up as an authority figure. As I watched more of his content, for the first couple months, it was just self-help stuff. But then I started to notice that he had all these other videos about politics and social commentary, and he would talk about the relationships between men and women, and he would talk about the state. And behind it, he always had the veneer of he was a Renaissance man, calls himself a philosopher that is trying to bring the objective truth to the world. And his philosophy was called objectivism. And I was young and naive when he would feed me this information about history and about what he saw as scientific facts and his theories and his social commentaries. because of the benefits that I'd gotten from him and the pain that he had relieved from me, I assumed he was honest. Slowly over time, I started to adapt a lot of those ideas that he had about society and about politics. On top of that, he had guests on his show. And so when he would bring a guest on, they would have their own little pet issue that they would want to talk about. Islam, feminism, all types of things. I thought, well, Staff's vetted these people, and he talks so positively with them in the video, and he agrees with them, and so I would set them up as an authority figure. So I got introduced to people like Crowder and Shapiro, and once I started listening to them, I started believing into a lot of the conservative principles. And then from there, I got introduced to people like Lauren Southern and Kevin McInnes, and then finally, by the end of it, I'm listening to Jared Taylor talk about racial differences, and it all had this sense that it was all connected, and they had clear outgroups on who the enemy was and who was reliable. The left, the liberals, the communists. There was always this conspiracy at the gates that the left is trying to take us down, and it seems so plausible because the left does seem to have a domination on things like Hollywood and a lot of the culture, and so these conservatives, they would play it up like they were victims, like their free speech was being taken and their values were being destroyed, and I bought into that rhetoric. I started out as a libertarian, mind you, when I watched Stefan's content. Before that, I was a liberal, but then as I listened to Stefan, I picked up libertarian ideas. What would happen was I would get to a point where, I wanted the libertarianism because I wanted a free society, but then I realized that, well, we can't have a free society if there isn't social cohesion and there isn't a strong structure to bind us together. And so I slowly found myself turning into a conservative. I started out as a libertarian, and then because I thought that we needed social cohesion, I became a conservative. And then from there, I thought that the conservatives weren't going far enough. We called them cucks. And I started to believe that we needed strong borders, and we needed a national identity, and we needed to raise the birth rates. And to me, it wasn't necessarily white birth rates. I saw it more as like, we needed more intelligent people having children. As I started to learn more, as I listened to people like, Jared Taylor or, MacLeod started putting out a lot more race content, talking about race and IQ, talking about the bell curve, and, they use this term called race realism. And the idea is that there's differences in the races depending on where they evolved in the world. They're immutable. They're tied to biology. I bought into that, and because of that, I started to see society as a product of this, the combination between culture and race being so important because it's tied to IQ. I bought more and more into it. I went further down the funnel, and at the point where I landed, I wouldn't call it full alt-right, and I didn't go that far, but I did entertain ideas, and especially during the Trump era, about a strong leader and a unified party, and we had to expel the invaders, which I saw as like Muslims and Marxists, and we had to expel the traitors, which, once again, were like the communists and anybody that was promoting degeneracy within our culture. I just kept falling deeper and deeper into this, and it appealed to me because it made me feel a sense of belonging. It made me feel a sense of progressing forward, both progressing forward and preserving what we have.
So that's the fear. Disenfranchised schmuck who, rather than going to a doctor to treat his depression, goes to YouTube and falls down a anti-SJW rabbit hole, as they call it. Okay, this is a guy who was watching Stefan Molyneux videos and sometime later embraced things like ethnic cleansing, genocide and eugenics. This is what terrifies the left, and now I'll show you.
Back to PewDiePie. When he heard that his name was mentioned in a terrorist attack, he quickly moved to disavow the terrorist and his actions. But people began to point out that PewDiePie had previously done things that many people would consider were dog whistles to white supremacists. And they also pointed out that he was currently following several people that many consider to be the gateways to white nationalism. Kid O'Connell took a screenshot of those people and posted it with the caption, "Here are some of the Nazi scum PewDiePie was following until recently. Why is he following them? Because PewDiePie is a f***ing Nazi." Most of the people on that list don't produce content that is blatantly white nationalist, but they often create content that feeds into its ideologies. And while they're all different and some of them even disagree with each other, they often work in Congress. Frequently, people are drawn in with things that are innocuous. Initially, young men may be drawn to Jordan Peterson because he seems like a father figure that gives sagely advice. However, as you follow him, you hear more and more about things like birth rates, immigration levels, and the proper role of women in society under a man. He'll collaborate and interact with people who flirt closer and closer to white nationalism, and people who may have been following him for sagely advice are now introduced to people with more severe ideologies. So while Jordan Peterson on his own may not believe in the alt-right as a movement as someone who is against identity politics even for white people, following him frequently leads you to following people with more blatantly white nationalist views, who also discuss birth rates, immigration, and the proper role of a woman in society. So these different speakers connect through similar criticisms, and while they may have slightly different ideas from each other, frequently their audience is the same, and that audience is also part of PewDiePie's audience. So what now? Is PewDiePie a Nazi? I don't think so. I do, however, believe that he's incredibly useful to those who want to spread white nationalism, and he's being courted by those who know that his platform is probably the most effective at doing this. Think about it. White nationalists have been fighting for decades to mainstream their ideology. In a world where everyone seems tethered to the internet, having the support of the most subscribed to person on YouTube means a lot, not only to those talking heads, but to PewDiePie's followers. While someone like Ben Shapiro isn't a white nationalist, he and Spencer have similar ideas about immigration and how Muslims are incompatible with American culture. PewDiePie has also mentioned Ben Shapiro several times, and Shapiro has even hosted a segment on his channel. From what I can tell, PewDiePie thinks Ben Shapiro is a meme and doesn't really take him seriously or anything he says seriously. However, maybe that's not how it's being seen by his audience. People who both support Shapiro and think that he's ridiculous and meme-worthy might see his existence on PewDiePie's channel as support. It has the benefit of not alienating people who support some of the more damaging things that he says, while also maintaining his audience who laughs at him. PewDiePie tries to be apolitical, so he doesn't criticize Shapiro. But while Shapiro may post something meme-worthy, he is at his core very political. While PewDiePie has said that he doesn't support hate or hate groups, he hasn't done it in a way that would actively alienate the white nationalists who follow him. Situations like this have always confused me because while sure, you can't really control your followers, you can make it clear that you disagree with their ideologies.
Okay, so I've sat through an unbelievable amount of straw manning and hyperbole so that you can see the whole rationale. We have this idea that the disenfranchised, hard-working but poor young men who realise that they're not going to save the world, it's not their destiny to be rich and famous, get depressed, get easily sucked in by a sort of quasi-endorsement validation just because people invited to their favourite YouTubers' channels talk about birth rates and things like that. Okay, so you might believe that this is the recruitment process for Nazis, for the extreme right, people who want to genocide other races. But you could also assume that similar people who come across views on the left end up in Antifa. We will always have vulnerable people susceptible to violent ideologies. But to come to a conclusion that says, therefore we should ban everyone, we should ban an entire wing of political debate wherever and whenever we can, because it might serve as a gateway drug, because it may be like this, because it may be like this, because there are so many ifs and buts. It's so flimsy it beggars belief, and it's presupposing as well that white nationalism is the worst thing imaginable. Well, no, it's not. White nationalism is a philosophy that basically says we'd be better off grouping with our own kind. There would be no racism in society because there would be no other races. There would be no people piping up to deplatform us and defend other races and rag on us all the time because there would be no other races. You know, that this situation evolves, the argument evolves. Then we build into it that only in Europe and America are people actually saying stuff like this. There's nobody in Africa saying we need more whites here. There's nobody in Japan saying that let's get a load of Europeans in to do the shitty jobs. White nationalism is a political theory and you can take it or leave it as you like. It doesn't automatically jump to genocide. The extreme of white nationalism obviously is wiping out foreign cultures. But you'll find so many people, I mean, this statistic that I come up with, 80 to 90% plus of the population have working conscience and empathy. That pretty much means that nobody will be in it for genocide. Some people might be in it for send the immigrants home and that kind of stuff. But even that isn't necessarily based on hate. You're coming up with a fear of an extreme minority and broadcasting it as if it's fear of the potential effects of the words of people talking about observations, talking about scientific facts, talking about IQ differences between races, talking about crime levels between different races, talking about wage compression, grouping behaviour. You know, there's a lot. You can't just sweep these subjects off the table. If there's something here, it's much better to put it out in the open and have a look at it. I don't believe that the majority of people interested in having a sensible immigration policy of controlling levels and controlling the type of people who come in and screening out criminals and extreme jihadis and people like that. I don't think the majority of people who have these concerns have got hate in their hearts. It's a flawed system. But these people are taking this flawed system and doing things like this.
It's my content that got me invited to the YouTube headquarters in 2017, where I met with various teams and got the chance to sit down and ask the CEO of YouTube what she's doing about this intentional rebranding of white nationalism and how it had the capacity to radicalize people towards terrorism.
What the fuck? So you create this lengthy and bizarre journey for schmucks to fall down as far as white nationalism and then make the huge leap to radicalization and terrorism. And unlike people on the right who are happily debating subjects, you go running to mama to get them told off and deplatformed. And you wonder why there's so much fucking resistance to your ideas. Holy shit. You know, in the business world, they make this thing about smart plans. A specified, measurable objective is attainable, realistic, and on a timeline. Now, if you look at your actions, all your deplatforming, censoring, and speech policing, and now thought policing, and you look at what they've done to our society, there has to be a point at which you say, you know what, open discourse is best, because we've killed comedy. We've woke and fucked up Hollywood. We've destroyed entire pieces of culture. We've caused to be hidden Muslim grooming and rape gangs. We've caused to be hidden elevated levels of crime among immigrants. We've caused to be ignored and looked away from some of the biggest rises in crime that Europe has ever seen. We refuse to admit that radicalization and terrorism is being carried out in the name of Islam. That terrorist attacks conducted to the cry of Allahu Akbar have nothing to do with Islam. That somehow Jews and Muslims can live in peace when the Muslim Quran is full of references to people of the book, which are Jews and Christians, being chattel and infidels and worth only to be killed. You turn a blind eye to all these problems on the presupposition that the person who wants to talk about them is somehow filled with hate. And look at the effect it has on our societies. And you still think this is a good idea. You can't assess your own behaviour and say, you know what, it's time to wind our necks in and allow people and politicians to discuss serious matters. I will be grown up enough to assume that anyone who talks about this is not going to jump to the genocide end of the spectrum. If you had a smart plan with the stated objective of getting rid of Nazis, then the project was flawed from the beginning. The vast majority of people are against genocide, are against eugenics, are against totalitarian control. So rather than having a sensible aims and objectives, what you've done is rebrand people in the centre and right as far right and then wage war against them. So there's nothing useful is going to come out of that when you move the goalpost on a debate and wage a fake war. Only idiots are going to believe you, and what you've done is radicalised your own followers, so now they have a hair-trigger obsession with spewing words like racist and anti-Semite and Nazi. These things fall unthinkingly from their mouth like drool from the lips of a psychotic. And there's a reason this analogy is so fitting, because they live in a fantasy land where everyone who disagrees with them must have dark, hate-fueled motivations. That can be the only explanation, right? They're twisted. They are so far removed from reality that the only sensible course of action is simple resistance. The world that your own radicalised followers have created, with selective pressure in favour of lying, wheedling politicians who avoid contentious subjects, which you have made contentious, are the only people at the forefront of public office now. The world you've created is full of people too scared to even investigate Muslim rape gangs. We've got violence from the left that goes unpunished and brings us a two-tiered legal system based on the criminals' political views or their religion. Fuck me, they're disintegrating our once awesome culture so much that it now includes Bronze Age blasphemy laws, deplatforming of centrist views, speech policing, newspeak, and we're even edging into thought policing, which is what you just attempted to do. The shocker is that you don't see the problem with all this. You've taken Godwin's law to its shortest journey. Everyone who disagrees with you is eligible for the Hitler accusation, and it must be levelled at the earliest opportunity. And you still don't realise the vast majority of people are against Nazi policies. If you look at the results of this project, it's all shite and you've achieved nothing. You were never going to achieve anything. So you're deplatforming people as part of a fake war which is producing on your side the very fucking Nazis that you're supposed to be opposing.